There are places that disappear without fire or battle. They fade quietly, leaving only silence behind. No warning. No final goodbye. Only empty buildings and unanswered questions. This is the story of one such place. At the start of the 20th century, the American West still felt like a place being built in real time. Railroads pushed forward, towns appeared at the end of tracks, and prospectors moved like storms across dry valleys and rocky ridges. Every rumor of mineral wealth created a new possibility. Every possibility became a reason to pack a bag and leave the familiar behind. This settlement began with such a rumor. A small group of prospectors found promising ore along a remote ridge, far from any established town. The discovery was not massive, but it was enough to be believed. Word spread through mining camps and supply stations. Within weeks, men arrived with tools, wagons, and dreams. They set up tents first. Then they built wooden structures. The settlement grew into something more permanent than a camp. It became a place. The mine became the town's center. It was not just a workplace. It was the reason people lived there. The company built housing close to the shaft. A general store opened. A small post office followed. The town's name was chosen with confidence, as if the future was already decided. It sounded like a promise. Life in the settlement was harsh but familiar. Miners worked long hours underground. Dust covered everything. Water was scarce and expensive. Supplies arrived by wagon on irregular schedules. The nearest railroad was still days away. The town existed in its own world, measured by shifts in weather and or output. The population grew quickly, reaching a few hundred. Some men brought their families. Others planned to send for them later. The settlement built a schoolhouse and began laying the foundation for a church. There was talk of expansion, of new shafts and more workers. The town seemed to be moving toward permanence. But early signs of fragility appeared almost immediately. The ore was not as rich as first reported. Extraction became more difficult as the mine went deeper. Equipment broke down frequently, and replacement parts took weeks to arrive. Water shortages slowed processing. The company began to tighten control over wages and supplies. Tensions rose quietly, under the surface of daily life. Still, most residents stayed, leaving men admitting the dream had failed. The mine was still operating, and that was enough. For now, the settlement continued to grow. It believed in its own future. It did not yet know how quickly that future could vanish. The town's decline did not begin with a single dramatic event. It began with small changes that slowly reshaped daily life. The mine's output decreased, and the decline was gradual enough that people still hoped it would reverse. The ore veins narrowed. Mining required deeper shafts and heavier equipment. Costs rose, and the company began to respond in ways that created tension rather than confidence. Wages were reduced. Shifts became longer. Safety measures were delayed. Miners were pushed to work harder for less. Accidents began to happen more often. At first, they were treated as part of the job. Then they became reminders that the mine was no longer stable. A few men were injured in cave-ins. Tools failed. Air quality worsened. The mine's management tried to keep the situation calm, but the atmosphere changed anyway. Water became the most critical issue. The settlement relied on a distant source, miles away, and transporting it was expensive and slow. Attempts to dig new wells failed. When water shortages hit, or processing slowed, production dropped further. The company tried to maintain operations, but the mine began to feel like a machine running without enough fuel. Supply issues followed. The town depended on wagon deliveries for food, equipment, and everyday goods. As production declined, merchants grew cautious. Credit tightened. Prices rose. Families began to feel the strain. Some left quietly, sending children to relatives in other towns. Others waited, holding on to the belief that the mine would reopen with new investment. Plans for a railroad spur that could connect the settlement to larger markets were discussed, then postponed. The company's engineers visited and wrote reports. Their tone was cautious. They noted the ore was still present, but the costs of extraction outweighed the profit. The town was too isolated. The mine was too unreliable. Without a rail connection, the settlement's future depended on wagons and weather. Then the company announced a temporary suspension of operations. No one believed it would be permanent. The word temporary gave residents a reason to stay. Work stopped. Wages stopped. Guards were dismissed. The mine entrance was locked. The town entered a strange state. It was not dead, but it was no longer alive. Empty houses sat with doors open. The general store remained, but shelves were half full. The post office closed. Mail stopped arriving. People still walked the streets, but their conversations were shorter. The tone of hope faded into something quieter. As weeks turned into months, the settlement became a waiting place. It waited for the mine to reopen. It waited for the company to return. It waited for the future it had believed in. But the waiting slowly became the new reality. The moment of collapse did not arrive as a single, dramatic event. It arrived as a series of quiet endings. The mine did not explode. No flood swallowed the town. There was no sudden disaster. Instead, the settlement simply ran out of reasons to exist. As the months of waiting continued, the remaining residents began to leave one by one. The first to go were those with families. They had no desire to risk another winter in a place where supplies were already unreliable. They left in small groups, carrying what they could. Some walked toward the nearest railroad town. Others followed the wagon roads toward other mining camps. They did not say goodbye. There was no ceremony. The departures were quiet, almost secretive, as if leaving would make the settlement less real. The saloon closed its doors. The schoolhouse remained empty. The general store sold its last goods at a loss. Even the company housing began to fall into disrepair. Roofs leaked. Walls cracked. Wind moved through empty rooms. The town's structures started to look like ruins while people still lived inside them. The mine itself remained silent. Its entrance was sealed, not with official closure but with debris and neglect. Rails rusted in place. Equipment lay where it had been left. The air in the shafts grew stale. The dark tunnel felt like a memory rather than a workplace. The mine, once the heart of the settlement, became a symbol of what had been lost. By the end of the second year, fewer than 20 people remained. Most were men who had nowhere else to go. They shared the same buildings, the same limited supplies, and the same uncertainty. They stayed because leaving felt like admitting the dream had failed. They stayed because the town had become their identity. Then the winter arrived with a harshness that seemed to reflect the settlement's condition. A storm collapsed part of the main structure near the mine. Another roof caved in. Repairs were impossible. There was no one left with the resources to fix what was broken. The remaining residents watched as their last shelter became unsafe. One by one, they left. Not all at once. Not in a single group. Just scattered departures. Some were forced by the weather. Some were forced by hunger. Some simply left because the town no longer felt like a home. When the final residents left, the settlement did not receive a farewell. There was no sign posted. No last meeting. No official record of closure. The town simply became empty. The silence settled in. Years later, travelers passing through would see the empty buildings. They would feel the stillness. They would not know the names of the people who once lived there. They would not know why the town had vanished. The settlement remained, but its story began to fade. The town remained empty for years, and no one returned to check the buildings or count what was left behind. Wind moved through broken windows, and dust gathered in abandoned rooms. The mine shaft stayed dark, and its entrance was slowly covered by sand and fallen beams. The settlement had become a place of quiet decay. The road that once carried wagons and supplies gradually vanished. Grass and brush grew over the track, and the path became difficult to follow. Over time, the route turned into only a faint memory. The town was still there, but the connection to the outside world had been erased. Maps stopped showing the settlement. It was no longer worth marking, and new maps simply showed empty land where the town had once stood. The name of the settlement disappeared from charts and official records, as if it had never existed. Even the nearby communities stopped speaking of it, and older residents began to forget the exact location. The story became a rumor, and the rumor faded into silence. The buildings did not collapse in a single moment. They decayed slowly, as years passed without repairs or care. Roofs caved in. Walls leaned and split. The schoolhouse remained only a frame of wood. The saloon became a dark outline in the distance. The store turned into a pile of boards, and the church foundation stood only a stone. Decades moved forward, and the desert reclaimed what was left. Sand filled the streets. Wind smoothed the edges of the structures until they blended with the landscape. When travelers passed through the area, they saw only ruins and felt the silence. They did not hear any names. They did not know the people who once lived there. The settlement did not end with a headline or an official notice. It simply faded, quietly and without ceremony. Time continued to move on, and the world changed around the abandoned town. The settlement stayed still, like a photograph left in the sun. Eventually, even the ruins were gone, and only the land remained. Only the silence remained, and only the empty space where the town once stood. Thank you for watching. New historical stories are published regularly.